So we're here at ICA 2018 with Professor Ann Weatherall from the School of Psychology in the University of Wellington in New Zealand. Thank you very much for agreeing to take part in this interview.
Thank you.
I suppose my first question would be taking you back before your PhD or to a time where you maybe got interested in discursive psychology. I wonder if you could maybe say something about how you got interested in DB.
Sure. Well, I started off doing a psychology degree at the University of Otago in New Zealand, and at that time, and actually still now today, it's mainly rats and brains. So by the time I finished my undergraduate degree, I had a very good training in experimental social psychology, and it wasn't until my fourth honours year where I started learning in developmental psychology about Vygotsky and Mead and the importance of language, and then just a tiny little bit in social psychology, starting to understand language and social psychology, Howard Giles's work, speech accommodation theory, the importance for identity, for language use and the way language was marking intergroup relations, interpersonal relations and intergroup relations, that I became very interested in language and social psychology. And at the same time, also I was given the opportunity to do a honours project, and I chose the topic of sexism in language.
Yeah.
So by the end of my degree at Otago, I was very interested in language and social psychology, also gender issues, the relationship between gender and language, language and social disadvantage, intergroup relations. And it was that interest that led me to apply for a PhD at Lancaster University, where there were other people such as Susan Condor and Charles Antaki, who were interested in those sorts of issues. Yeah, and at the same time, as I finished my undergraduate degree, I was finishing it right on as the Potter and Weatherall Discourse in Social Psychology book came out. So England, for me, seemed like an obvious place to go to further explore these ideas.
Wow, yeah, fantastic. So the PhD was my next question. I just wondered if you could maybe talk about the topic of your PhD, how that came about.
Sure. Well, I decided to look at gender and language, and in some ways I've been very dissatisfied with the work that I did for my PhD, because I felt like I'd come from having very quantitative experimental training, and yet theoretically I was very persuaded by both the feminist critiques of psychology, but also the critiques coming out of the Loughborough group here of the limitations of essentialism for understanding psychological phenomena, for the limitations of how we operationalise concepts, quantification, experimental design. So on the one hand I had training in one area, and on the other hand I was very theoretically attracted to social constructionist ideas. So what I ended up doing was looking at Coronation Street.
Oh wow.
Which got me into work about the media, language in the media a little bit. But so I was interested in qualitative data, but not quite ready to move to what became a stronger discursive position, which is the dead scientist test, where you have data that would exist in the world. Now, I'm not talking about the Coronation Street so much there, but then I had people coming and talking about Coronation Street, and I was looking at how they were referencing characters. But still, now I look back and think that was the sort of thing that I was interested in is naturalistic data, really, not just qualitative data, but where people are doing real things in the real world and have real things at stake. And it took me a while really to get to that. It took really till after my PhD to start recording in children's playgrounds and so on. Yeah.
Wow.
Another thing about the time that I was in at Lancaster University doing my PhD was that at that time, because it was really just as discursive, well, what became discursive psychology, but then it was called discourse analysis in psychology. And really at that time, discourse analysis was almost the same as, treated as equivalent of, as feminist psychology, because it was Margie Weatherall, Sue Wilkinson, Jane Ussher, Celia Kitzinger. They were all both doing feminist critiques of psychology and promoting qualitative methods, discourse analysis, using the ideas that were emerging from Edwards and Potter. So I always think it's interesting and a sort of a bit of a forgotten aspect that at that time feminist psychology and discourse analysis was seen to be sort of the same thing in a way.
Yeah, it must have been an amazing time to be sort of around, people.
It was such an exciting time to be in the UK, that emergence of strong feminist psychology and discursive psychology, and really as a PhD I had my little mind blown, and as I say, it was a difficult transition, but fortunately for me, I got an academic job straight out of my PhD, and what I really felt like I brought back to New Zealand was what was happening here at that time in the early 90s, the cutting edge, and being able to bring that to New Zealand, and that was a unique contribution because even though Margie Weatherall has links back to New Zealand, she was working at Open University at the time. So I felt like I was able to bring back those ideas to New Zealand.
Wow. And did you when you were here, did you ever go to DARG? Did you ever experience the DARG?
While I was doing my PhD, I didn't, but subsequently I've had occasion to come to DARG on a couple of occasions. I was able to present some complaint calls that I brought here, and of course DARG is very well known, and I was here for the occasion of mixed retirement and then when Jonathan and Alexa were leaving, so so I do feel like I've been around for a big part of the history of DARG, and of course it's been such an important occasion for developing a nice tight academic community where people who share ideas can discuss and debate.
And just turning to your research now, and you've been interested in some really fascinating types of topics such as motherhood and sex work, two very different types of contexts. Can I ask how you got interested in that particular type of topic?
Areas.
Or any other areas really?
Yeah, it's interesting how it is that you get to study particular things. One, I guess I have a bit of a philosophy towards how it is what research topics I end up doing. And a starting point for that philosophy was not necessarily to go head on to the thing that you're interested in. So I am interested in stuff like gender and sexuality. I am interested in intergroup relations, how the social moral order is maintained, perpetuated, how social relationships are established and maintained. But unlike I think in traditional psychology, where you say that's what you're interested in, you have a theory and you test it, instead influenced by a more ethno-methodological kind of viewpoint, it's let's go have a look somewhere, like at an institution, and just trust that those sort of things are going to emerge. So, and sometimes it's just opportunistic. So it's a matter of looking out for and taking up opportunities that will enable you to get into those things. So, for example, one of my areas of interest is in violence against women, because of course it's a massive social problem. But instead of going at it directly, sometimes you get really gems of pieces of data. So in the complaint calls and dispute resolution, there was one call where a woman was ringing up because she didn't want a meter reader to come into her house because the electricity meter reader had to come in, and she was a nurse on night duty and she'd been accosted by a meter reader. And so this kind of came out in the unfolding of an interaction in a very naturalistic way. Which I think ultimately gives us much better insights into how people with those kind of experiences, how that can come to be consequential on their everyday lives in very practical ways. Because the call taker in that case couldn't really understand why she didn't want the meter reader to come round to read her meter, because mostly people want meter readers to come around so they get accurate meter readings for their electricity. So I guess I have a kind of philosophy of trusting that the kind of issues, because they are so fundamental issues of gender, and social inequality and so on, they come to the fore because they're there. You don't actually have to go and interview people about them or anything like that.
Yeah, sure. And of your research, is there anything in particular that stands out, or any particular phenomena that you've discovered or been interested in, or has grabbed your attention more than anything else?
Well, I think that's where CA comes in, really, because I think why I love CA is because when you start looking at the detail of interaction, which is itself a beautiful thing and beautifully coordinated and so on, you really begin to get these amazing insights into the very fine detail of how it is people are managing psychological concerns. So, for example, the paper that I'm giving here at ECA arose out of a repair sequence where somebody was making an offer, and calls to victim support was, did you wanna, do you wanna? It's like, what's the difference between did you wanna to do you wanna? Why would a participant change those two things? And what I think the analysis has shown is that if somebody says, did you wanna, that's just slightly more in the speaker's realm that they can do something. But if it's in do you want to, that's slightly more, I could do this if you say so. And so to discover that a very important part of self are the relationships. Who has the rights to progress the course of action? Is it me or is it you? It's played out at this amazingly fine detail is something that I find immensely fascinating and a real contribution, and that's where an interest in psychology and an interest in conversation analysis gets you, I think. Yeah.
That sounds fascinating. Yeah. Just on the topic of CA, I know you went abroad to UCLA a few years ago and studied with Manny Shepard and John Heritage.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could just say a little bit about your experience of being in that kind of situation.
Well, it was fantastic, because one thing I guess a lot of people know who's tried to learn CA is it's a very hard thing to learn on your own. And in fact, I had been learning Carly Butler, my one of my first PhD students, her and I sort of learned conversation analysis together and were trying to read Sachs and understand what was going on. And we were, some of the first papers I was trying to use CA was with Carly. And we were getting reviews back going, you're not really doing proper CA. And I think there is some policing around those boundaries. So I wanted to get, I wanted to make sure I was properly trained, and it was absolutely fantastic to attend the classes and go to the data sessions of Minnie Shegloff and John Heritage and Chuck Goodwin, and then at UCSB too with Jean Lerner and Jeff Raymond, to see how the skill and analytic insight those people have to be able to describe what's going on in a piece of conversation and exactly how it's going on. I mean, and an important aspect at that time too was the other people that were there. So when I was there were a number of Swedish academics there, so Helen Meander and Lilo Kievelic is actually Estonian, but she works in Sweden, and also other people such as Betty Cooper-Coolin was there. So it was through UCLA that I established relationships with other people throughout the world with similar interests. But what you really got at UCLA, and it's the same way DARG progresses data sessions. You have a piece of data, you play it, you work with it carefully on your own for 5 minutes, then you start making observations and what's going on, how is it done. It's a very good model. Yeah.
And would you say your recent research, you've looked at emotion interaction, things like hedging, repair, membership categorisation. Would you say that your more recent research is using more CA than maybe in the past? Has there been a trajectory of different types of approaching data?
Definitely. I guess throughout my career it moved from quantitative experimental work to qualitative data, but quantitative analysis to more naturalistic settings. The work that you mentioned on sex work and motherhood, that was interview-based studies using more an interpretive repertoire type analysis, which you're drawing upon CA ideas, but also drawing on a lot of Jonathan Potter's work on rhetorical devices and so on. But now absolutely committed to naturalistic interactions, the things, as Jonathan Potter says, pass the dead scientist test. And yes, absolutely committed to the method of CA, although open to what I think Lorenzo Mondada says is the complexification of CA, where you bring in multimodality, multisensoriality. And I think discursive psychology can benefit from broadening out. It's not just the talk, it's the body, and it's not just the talk and the body and the movement, but you can do touch and taste. So yes, very much committed to conversation analysis.
So you're currently course leader for Discursive Social Psychology back in Wellington. I wonder if you maybe just say a little bit about how it is teaching DP in a psychology school, especially. How has the reaction been to teaching maybe psychology students a new way of looking at interaction?
So I teach a third-year class. It's called Discourse and Social Psychology, and it's basically a couple of weeks on the discursive turn in psychology, then a lot of learning of the method, some of the basic structures of CA, and then applying them to clinical encounters, including psychotherapy. With the students, they really haven't got much, even in qualitative methods, before they come to me. So the students find it a big shift. And for those, there's a portion of students who find it transformational, that for them, they had never, in their degree so far, realised that you could study psychology by studying social interaction, which to me just seems so ridiculous for psychology students to come through and never study social interaction, which is a primordial site for sociality. But students absolutely are transformed and transfixed for those who can get it. But for others, it's a bit of a shame because I think they find it such a switch that they kind of can't quite understand it.
Yeah. And also at Wellington, you run the Discursive Psychology group. I wonder if you could maybe just say something about how the activities there.
Yeah, so I supervise PhD students, master's students and honours students. So my own local Discursive Psychology group, we meet fortnightly and do a mini data sessions where each student will come and present some data and analysis. Occasionally we will read papers, but we tend not to do that so much. But when there's important debates like quantification and conversation analysis, or whether there's an epistemic engine or not, we'll get together and read the relevant papers and discuss and debate those. But on the whole, it's very data driven. And then once a month we have a larger Wellington interaction and data analysis group, which is modelled on DARG. And again, we meet and discuss data. That's with the group at the Wellington School of Medicine. So it's a lot of medical interaction.
Okay, so there's a bit of crossover to different departments, different schools, different universities.
That's right. And we also attract some sociology students who are doing ethnomethodology. And through that, often we have an exchange with the TAG group in Queensland. So the TAG group in Queensland includes people like Rod Gardner and Susan Danby, and some of their group might come to us once or twice a year, or some of our group will go to them, and then we have a sort of bigger Australasian Australasian workshop day, a bit like the CA day here. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So just looking ahead now, I wonder if you could share any plans for future research.
The project that I would like to get off the ground, and I think I have the opportunity to do this, is would involve going out with paramedics in the field and first response to medical emergencies. I met this is the serendipity of it all, I met the research manager in the St John's ambulance head office, who's really interested to get research done on paramedics in the field, because communication for them, like how communication works when you're at an emergency, there's a lot of coordination of the first responders, the fire, the patient, onlookers, and the organisation is very aware that good effective communication can be a matter of life and death, and they want people to come in and look at that. So I'm hoping to be able to do that, and I don't think it's a kind of environment that's been done before.
That sounds fascinating.
So that's one thing, and the other thing is I've just got a new PhD student, Gates Henderson, and she's interested in people who have been diagnosed with autism and the way they looking at their interactions. So that's another project that currently we have going.
Yeah. Wow. So a final question. And a reflexive question. What would you say that DP, Discursive Psychology, adds to social interaction that other approaches maybe don't or neglect?
In some ways that's a difficult question, because a question I often discuss with my students is what can conversation analysis, for example, contribute to psychology? So it's the question's the other way around. And I have been thinking about that question a little bit, and I think there are a number of things that I would suggest discursive psychology adds to the study of interaction. One is because discursive psychology emerged out of a deeply cognitivist approach to psychology, it has a very strong theoretical sense that it's the language and the social interaction that itself is the object of analysis. Now, if you go to, say, people with a background in linguistics who are doing conversation analysis, in their interpretation of what goes on, one can see an easiness to slip into a kind of cognitivist thing where you're attributing motivation to why people are saying that. But because discursive psychology has emerged out of a reaction to overly attributing cognition to social behaviour, I think just people working in discursive psychology have a heightened sensitivity to that, and so are more properly able to practice the rigour, the true rigour of conversation analysis, which is bracketing off cognition and those things to see interaction, the order in the interaction itself. So that's one thing I think that discursive psychology offers the study of interaction, a reminder of the rigour that's needed not to slip into cognitivism. Another thing that seems to be quite salient at ECA 2018 is there seems to be a big move towards coding and quantification. And of course there is a debate within conversation analysis and the study of social interaction, the extent to which that's done. The same way there's work emerging where eye tracking is being used, for example, to look at gaze. And of course the question is that doesn't pass your dead scientist test. Discursive psychology emerged out of a deep scepticism of the operationalisation of variables and the ability of statistics to provide meaning, the dangers of essentialism and quantification. So again, I think discursive psychologists who truly understand the theoretical background and the emergence are much more cautious and able to critique the limitations of that. We're not as so enamoured by scientific methodology because we truly understand that as a way of understanding social behaviour, it's deeply limited. So those would be two things. And I think a third thing that discursive psychology offers the study of social interaction is to keep very salient what psychological matters are. So, at the very heart of social interaction is a relationship between a self and an other, and that's an interpersonal relationship. So, in some ways, I think discursive psychology keeps very much alive that actually social interaction is pervasively and inescapably a psychological matter.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant.